Hi there, my name is Caitlin Bandy and this is my channel BandysBooks, and today I am here with review number 2 for the Women's Prize 2024 Longlist. If you have been watching my channel for a little while, you will know that I already reviewed Hangman by Maya Binyam, and now I'm here to review Western Lane by Chetna Maroo. This was published February 7th, 2023 by Farrar, Straus and Giroux. I believe this was published by Picador in the UK as well. In addition to being nominated for the Women's Prize in 2024, this was also shortlisted for the Booker Prize in 2023. This is a debut novel that is about an 11-year-old girl named Gopi who has been playing squash since she was old enough to hold a racket. When her mother dies, her father starts a brutal training regimen. Her life is reduced to sport as she grows apart from her sisters, but on the court, she's with her pa. Let me start this review by saying that I was a little bit nervous going into this one. I heard that this book was all about the sport of squash, and honestly, I had no clue what squash was. I mean, vaguely knew that it was a sport, but no idea if it was played with a racket, a net, a hoop, if it had 1 ball, 2 balls, 3 balls. So I was afraid I was going to be a little bit lost, but I found that this book was actually a lot more approachable than I was expecting. At its core, I feel like Western Lane isn't really that much about squash. I mean, it talks about squash a lot, and squash is a central point in the story, but I think it's really more about an 11-year-old struggling with grief. This isn't a super dramatic, heart-wrenching portrayal of grief, but more a subtle, meditative reflection on what grieving is. At the center of the story, we have 11-year-old Gopi, and I found her to be such a relatable character. I found the way that she throws herself into her sport of squash to cope with her grief to be incredibly realistic. Even as adults, I feel like a lot of adults use distractions to cope instead of actually dealing with the feelings, so seeing this in writing made a lot of sense. I also found the way that she responds to her father's grief to be really realistic as well. We see that he is brutal in training her for squash, and she doesn't complain. She digs deep and she does everything he asks of her. And in a way, I think it's an attempt for her to kind of help him cope with his own grief as well. Seeing the story through an 11-year-old's eyes really adds a layer of innocence to the whole narrative. One of the things that I think is really interesting about this book is that while Gopi is very vivid and we get a really clear picture of who she is, we don't really get a clear idea of any of the supporting characters. In particular, we see Pa and her sisters fairly frequently in the book, but we never really get too much detail about them. We get maybe a general feeling for them, but there's kind of a disconnect between the supporting characters and the story. They felt a little bit distant to me, and I think that that's intentional. I think that that distance with those supporting characters is meant to mirror the distance between the different family members as they each struggle to cope with the grief that they're feeling. We also never really learn much about Gopi's mother. We're given no reason for her death, no name, no substantial details. I felt like this was also intentional and sort of a metaphor for the way that Gopi's mom has been ripped out of her life. She's this figure that is looming over everything as everybody is coping with grief, but she's also not actually there. One thing that I think is very unique about this story is that the description is very simple and restrained. I feel that it was written in this style because it's trying to mirror the way an 11-year-old sees the world. We're seeing the story through Gopi's eyes, and if she was talking with super flowery prose, I don't think that it would feel authentic to her experience. While I did occasionally find myself wishing for a bit more detail or a bit deeper description, overall, I think if the author had pushed it much more than she did, we would have felt a big disconnect with the main POV. I will say that the plot of this story is not the most original one ever. We have a girl who loses her mom. She throws herself into a sport. She faces an obstacle and then she overcomes the obstacle. This is something we've seen done time and time again. What really makes it stand out in this particular instance is, again, the restraint and the simplicity that Maroo uses to write this narrative. And as I mentioned at the beginning of this review, I was a little bit worried that I was going to be put off by all of the squash description and detailed squash discussion, but I actually found this very approachable. I think that you don't really have to know anything about squash to appreciate this book. Overall, while this is a quiet reflection on childhood grief, I worry that some readers will feel impatient with its vague meandering. This is a book that could be very meaningful for a reader who takes their time, savors it, and allows themselves to sort of marinate in all of the feelings it brings up. I don't think that this will be the best book that I've read this year, but I do think that this quiet little reflection on grief will stick with me for a while. So that's the end of this review. If you liked it, hit the thumbs up button, comment down below, and let me know if you've read Western Lane, How did you feel about it? Did you like it? Was it too slow? Was it too short? Did you appreciate all of the squash information? And if you're interested in more women's prize content, make sure you check out my women's prize playlist. I will be linking all of the reviews for the women's prize long list within that playlist. And if you're not already subscribed to this channel, you know what to do. Hit that subscribe button down below, as well as the notification bell so that you never miss a video. And that way we can see each other again soon. Thanks so much for joining. Bye.